Our speaker for today is Sister Brendi Bluitt. She is currently a rising junior at Campbell University in Bowie's Creek, North Carolina, a university founded on Christian principles and continuing in its tradition of excellence in faith, learning, and service. Majoring in health communication and minoring in biology and interdisciplinary studies, Brendi's intended career goal is to become a pediatric oncologist. She is enrolled in Campbell's Honors Program and has been elected junior class president of the Student Government Association. For the past 8 years, she has been a member of Love and Faith Christian Fellowship Church in Greensboro, North Carolina, and volunteers as a counselor during the summer at Camp Carefree in Stokesdale, North Carolina. Camp Carefree provides a free one-week camping experience for kids ages 6 to 16 who are challenged with chronic illnesses such as cancer, spina bifida, and epilepsy. Brendi's grandparents are pastors Ernest and Brenda Sewell and Leonard and Elaine Bluitt, both deceased. Brendi was reared in a Christian home by her parents Deacon and Deaconess Leonard and Carla Bluitt. I think Brendi takes being big sister to Braden, Benjamin, and me, Bethany Bluitt, seriously. She has inspired us to always pray and believe that God will always answer prayer. It is a pleasure for me to present and introduce to the congregation our speaker for this great Student Recognition Sunday, Brendi Alana Bluitt.
Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to share with you how my faith helps me to follow the plans that God has set for me. And when I was preparing for this message, I was kind of just trying to figure out what I wanted to talk about, and especially what Bible verses I wanted to use, because I really enjoy having Bible verses just as motivation for me. So I have 4 verses for you today that kind of help me explain my testimony, and these verses helped me get through different phases in my life. So I'm going to use them to kind of help explain it. So the first verse that I have today is Jeremiah 29:11, and the NIV version reads, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." And I know that many people apply this verse to different things, but I feel like it's especially applicable for students. And I noticed that in the bulletin, this verse was also listed for in the bulletin for Student Recognition Sunday, which I thought was even more important that I talked about this today. And this scripture was very important for me during my sickness, throughout high school as well, and even in college. I felt like this verse really encapsulates my whole life. And like I said, I think it can be applied to various situations, students, or if you're starting a new job, or if you just graduated, which is why it's one of my favorites. And this verse is still important for me today, because I've got to admit, I don't always understand the plans that God has set for me, but I just have to be obedient and follow him. And I'll provide an example of that later on in my message when I talk about another verse. But just a few things that I haven't really understood the plans for. Well, one, I had some anxieties after my freshman year about transferring schools. I didn't really know if Campbell was the right place for me, but then I figured out that it was best for me to stay there. I have changed my major twice. I went into Campbell as a bio pre-med major, and after being forced to take botany, unfortunately, I realized that the biology major wasn't the best option to get me into med school. So I then switched to health communication, or actually before that I switched to clinical research. And then after being in the intro to clinical research class, I realized that it was too much of a focus on pharmaceuticals, and that's not really what I wanted to do. And so then I switched to health communication in the fall, and that has been the best major for me since. So I don't think I'll be switching anymore. And another thing that I'm still not sure about is whether I should go into DO school or MD school. And DO is a doctor of osteopathic medicine. And osteopathic medicine is the belief that the body can heal itself. It's really just more manipulation of your body rather than using medicines like a medical doctor would do. And both are classified as the same kind of doctor. They're both classified as doctors, it's just different kinds. So I still don't know which one I will end up at, but I do plan on applying to both types of schools, so I'll see what God has in store for me for that. The next verse that I want to share with you is Isaiah 53:5. And this verse was especially important for me right after I was diagnosed. And this reads, "But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed." And this was one of the first scriptures that I came across during my sickness. And little did I know that this scripture would really help to set the stage for the rest of my life. And just a little bit about how I got to my diagnosis. I was in 8th grade at the time, and I had been in pain for many, many months. I had just started dance team in November of 2010, and that's when I first started experiencing pain. It was the last day of tryouts, so it was the actual day of tryouts, but we had been working out all week to prepare for this day, and it was a Friday. And I had just started experiencing pain, so my mom thought maybe I just had shin splints, maybe I was just, working out too hard for the week. So it wasn't really that much of a big deal at the time. I had some different creams and some medicines that I would use to help with the pain, and those were working, so we didn't really think anything of it. And so that, like I said, that was in November. And then fast forward into about June, July, that's when the pain started getting really bad. I was seeing a chiropractor at the time. We were just really unsure where the pain was coming from, but everything that we were trying would start working. So we tried the allopathic method, using some creams and pills from Earth Fare, and that was working. And then once that stopped working, started going to the chiropractor and getting my back realigned started working. So we were really just not sure what exactly was wrong with me. And so in the June, July time was really when the pain started getting significantly worse. I started experiencing pain in the middle of the night. I'd just be waking up with searing pain in my leg. So that's when we decided to go see an orthopedic doctor who deals specifically with bones. And I went to the orthopedic, and I got x-rays done that day. And he said that he saw some shadiness in my bone, but he wasn't sure what it was. At least that's what they told me. I later found out that he did know I had cancer, and he told my parents, but I didn't find that out until later. I guess they just wanted to make sure I wasn't too worried or anything. So once I got the x-rays taken, I had gotten an MRI that same day because he thought it was a very pressing issue. So I got the MRI done, and then I like to say that the reason that everything went by so fast, and it was almost a blur for the next few weeks, but at the time it felt like time was moving so slowly, but looking back on it, it happened really fast. So I had 2 biopsies during that time. I had my cousin's wedding to go to that was up here in Maryland, and we live in North Carolina. And I had a follow-up visit, and then I was transferred back to Wake Forest Baptist Hospital, which is where I had my treatment done. But the biopsies were very important. They're a very important part of my story because a biopsy is when they take a piece of your tissue and they soak it in a solution for about a week, and then after that they can slice it thin enough to see what exactly is wrong with you. So my first biopsy disintegrated, which was very frustrating for me because 1, I didn't want to have another biopsy, and 2, I felt like I had already waited long enough, so I didn't understand why they weren't giving me the answers that we wanted. And also during this time, this is when my doctor was saying that he was 99% sure that I had osteosarcoma or Ewing sarcoma, and this was before the first biopsy. They said they've seen this prognosis thousands of times, that they were very certain that I had osteosarcoma or Ewing sarcoma, and so the biopsy was to determine which one it was to proceed with the treatment. So after the first biopsy disintegrated and I got the second biopsy done, we went back to see the doctor, and even though the week before he had been 99% sure that I had osteosarcoma or Ewing sarcoma, he was a bit confused, which I didn't really understand. And he really went from certainty to confusion, which I, of course, didn't understand because at the time I was 13, and I just didn't understand how he could change his mind so quickly from being 99% sure the week before to not even being sure if it was the type of cancer that he said the first time. But my dad told me that God had told him that things are not what they seem, and of course I didn't know what that meant. I was only 13. I didn't really understand everything. So then a couple days go by after we had seen the doctor again, and I got a call from Brenner Children's Hospital, which is the children's part of the hospital I would be getting treatment at. And the doctor called and he said, I have very good news. Brendi doesn't have osteosarcoma or Ewing sarcoma. She actually has lymphoma. And he kept repeating that this was one of the best cancers to have if you were to be diagnosed with cancer, which, again, I thought was a strange thing to say, but I just went with it. And he kept using words like extraordinary and remarkable to describe me, but obviously I knew that God had changed the cells in my body, and I knew that God was going to deliver me through this time. So I was in treatment from 2011 to 2014, and like I said, Isaiah 53:5 was really important for me. The last line that says, by his wounds we are healed, and that was very important during this time. I remember one night my younger brother was praying for me with both of my parents, and we were just reading over this verse and the surrounding verses too. So it was really important for me, and it's always been one of my favorite verses since then. And so that was the beginning of my journey. So the next verse that I would like to share with you is 2 Timothy 4:7. And this verse reads, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. And I actually came across this verse right before I was going to speak at a family friend's celebration for being at the end of his treatment. So I found this verse during that time, and I was like, wow, this is perfect. This literally describes what every cancer patient goes through. So from then, I kind of made it that was like my go-to Bible verse. So when I spoke at the family friend's celebration, I read this verse, and everyone also seemed to enjoy it too. And so even though I said the fight was over, there were still some obstacles that I would have to overcome. And one of these obstacles is a joint problem that I developed because of the steroids that I was on at the time. And I was diagnosed with vascular necrosis, which, like I said, is a joint problem. It's similar to arthritis, and it basically causes severe joint pain. And my hip surgeon, or my surgeon in general, she's convinced that I will need a double hip replacement at some point because of this, and this is from the steroids that I had to take to, cure the cancer. So you win some and you lose some. I learned this very early on. And like I said, AVN is a joint problem, and it caused me to quit cheer in high school, which really disappointed me. And but then I found out that this wasn't as uncommon as I thought it was. My senior year of high school, I actually did a research project all about childhood cancer funding. So I got to shadow my oncologist for 20 hours and then get to see some patients on the ward and also just research what exactly goes into cancer funding. And I learned that 4% of national funding goes to childhood cancers, which is a really big problem since childhood cancers cannot always be treated like adults, and there's often a lot of different subkinds. Like I said earlier, one of my doctors thought I would have osteo or Ewing sarcoma, and those can't be treated the same. So there's a lot of there's a lot of funding issues when trying to fund the treatments for childhood cancer. And from that, while I was researching for this project, I also learned that worldwide, a child is diagnosed with cancer every 2 minutes, and that over 60% of long-term childhood cancer survivors will have a chronic illness as a consequence of the therapy they received, and over 25% have a severe or life-threatening illness. And so once I learned about the long-term issues that some people may have, I actually realized that my friend Katie also has a vascular necrosis, so she's been someone that I've been able to talk to about it and relate to, which I feel like has been very beneficial for me to find someone that I can relate with and talk to about it. And Bethany mentioned in my introduction that I am a counselor at Camp Carefree in Stokesdale, North Carolina, and it's about 15 minutes from my house. And I've worked weeks out there for kids I've worked Neuro Week, which is for kids with epilepsy and neurological disorders. I've worked Siblings Week, which is for patients who have siblings that are in treatment. So Bethany, Braden, and Benjamin have all been to that camp before. I've worked there for Kids Week, which is if your parent is sick or has passed away. I've worked there for Hemo Turner Week, which is for kids who have hemophilia and Turner syndrome. So there's only been 2 weeks that I haven't been out there before, like over the past 3 years. So it's really interesting to see people come from all walks of life. And I've also gotten to work Cancer Week after being a camper there, so that was also very rewarding for me too. And it's just one of those places that really allows you to take a step back, especially when you're working other weeks. For Sibs Week, I get to see some kids who, being at camp is their only real time to get attention that's not on their siblings. So it's just really unique, and it makes me feel really good that I'm able to help those kids and to give them a fun experience when they do come to camp. And another verse that I have for you is Matthew 6:33. And Matthew 6:33 says, "But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." And I came across this verse this past fall, and I don't really remember what I was looking for that allowed me to come across this, but I really learned to apply this to my school and everything that I was doing, and that I had to constantly remind myself that God should be my focus, not school or student government or friends or anything else. And this was hard for me to do at first because with my major, it's very demanding, trying to become a doctor eventually. But I just really had to allow myself to take a step back and remind me of who should be my focus. And just being in college in general, I may not always understand everything that's happening, but I have to trust that it's in God's plan. And earlier I talked about I didn't know if I was going to be going to DO school or MD school, and that I don't always understand everything that's happening, but I just have to trust in Him. And one of these examples was in SGA. So I joined SGA just because my friend told me that I should, and I really didn't have any other clubs or organizations that I was a part of at the time. So I ran my little election for the sophomore class representative and won. There's 5 other representatives that serve along with me. And in this past September, we were at our retreat, and our retreat is where we get to know all the other class members, as well as like the freshman class, the junior class, senior class, and the executive board. So we were at retreat, and after we had met together, and we all had just an icebreaker, said our names and some ideas that we had to improve SGA for the upcoming year, the topic of improving food on campus had kept coming up. And our executive president said that we actually used to have a dining services committee, but it wasn't active anymore. But he was interested in having it started to be back up. So once we break off into all of our groups, into all of our class groups, the sophomore class president had said to all of us that he really wanted one of us to be the chair position. And there were only 3 people in our class who had done SGA before, but none of them were chairs. And before I knew it, I was volunteering to be the dining services chair, which I honestly would not have done on my own. Even though I do love food and try new restaurants, I would not have volunteered myself to be in a chair position, having only had 1 month of SGA experience. But I just know that was God. And being the chair position was actually really fun for me. And I got to meet with Aramark, who's our on-campus food provider. I got to meet with them twice a month. I got to hear students' concerns about what foods they did want to see and what foods they didn't want to see. And also, being in that chair position, I would also have to give a report at every congressional meeting, which we have every 2 weeks with all of Congress, all of SGA. And so I really was able to gain some credibility and respect from having that position. And so having that position also helped me to set up for the election that I just had this past spring. And like Bethany said, I'll be starting as the junior class president in the fall. And Had I not had this chair position, I really wouldn't feel comfortable running for president. So I am glad that God placed this in my life, and it has eventually allowed me to become president. And I also had to remind myself that, just talking about Matthew 6:33 again in general, I had to remind myself that I wouldn't get the grades I needed or meet any of my goals without him, without God. And after I graduate from college, I plan to work as an EMT for a year before going to med school and then eventually becoming a pediatric oncologist. And even though my plan right now is to become an EMT for a year, I don't know if that's God's plan for me. So we will see if I'm working as an EMT or if I'm shadowing a doctor or whatever I'm doing. But I just know that whatever I do, God will help me with it. And I've just had so many opportunities and met so many people because of my strong faith, and my strong faith was brought about, even though I did grow up in church, like Bethany said, my faith was really strengthened after I was diagnosed and after I had to go through treatment and everything. I can't even begin to tell you all the things that I've been able to do, or all the people that I've been able to meet because of this journey. And my strong faith has caused some uncertainty at times, but I do know that it's in God's best interest for me. And in closing, I would really encourage you all to meditate on some of the verses that I mentioned, especially for the students, Matthew 6:33. When you put your trust in God, he will open doors for you that you never thought possible. And when you put your faith in him, he will give you what you need to fulfill the plans that he has for you. Thank you.